students to this region of Jamaica with the Blue Mountain Project for around 20 years, something close to that. This little area here is where we were at. It's 10 miles as the crow flies from Kingston to Hagley Gap, but it will take you almost 2 hours to get there. So you land in Kingston and they put you into this big bus van type thing, and then you're bumping on dirt roads around curving mountains, and the roads are so narrow. So it's a challenging place to get to. The community itself is pretty small. It said that there were 1,600 people online. There was nowhere near that many that I saw, but I'm thinking that the region they consider Hagley Gap is much bigger than what we saw. So I would guess more like 25 to 50 families in the main area of Hagley Gap, and maybe more spread out in the little outer region of it. So it's really close to the Blue Mountain. So you can see here's the Blue Mountain, which is the tallest peak in Jamaica. And it's known for farming, of coffee in particular. So Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee is considered one of the best coffees in the world. So all around this whole region is coffee farm after coffee farm. And I'll come back and talk about that a little bit more when I talk about the people that we met there. It was very interesting to see that connection with the coffee. And as I said, we have a connection with Ripon College there. And the reason that Ripon College goes to this region is that it is an incredibly poor region. They have a lack of medical care, a lack of educational experiences for the kids. So our students go there and they help out with education programs. They also sometimes help with medical stuff, depending on that particular year what the goal is. And the Blue Mountain Project that we worked with there built a hospital in this region and also brought internet, because there was no internet in the region. So they brought internet also to these people. So this is the group that I traveled with. This was actually back in May of 2019, so before COVID. Everything got shut down, of course, with COVID, and we were especially careful because they are so remote that they were not as affected by COVID because no one goes into Hagley Gap for the most part. And we wanted to make sure that we kept it that way, that we were not introducing any pathogens. These 5 students went. There was 3 faculty members, so we were the 3 faculty members who went. And the goal of this trip is really to teach them about other cultures, other ways of living, and also give them experiences with working with kids to do education projects. So many of them are actually education majors, so it was a good experience for them to see what does an education system look like in Jamaica. So we actually did homestays. So all of the kids did, as well as all the faculty members did homestays in the area. There's no hotel, right? It's literally just these 50 families, houses. There is a little dance hall in the town where people go and have dances and things, and they sell like drinks. It's also a bar. They have chicken cooked there on Friday nights, so you can go get some jerk chicken on Friday nights. So it's like the only thing close to a restaurant there. Otherwise, there's like nothing. So you can walk about 15 minutes from the area that we stayed in to get to sort of a general store and a bigger bar. And that general store and bigger bar sold water, a little bit of candy, of course alcohol, and a couple of products, not much though. It was barely a general store, and you might be able to get a couple things. And I think you could put orders in and they'd bring you stuff, but for them to get to an actual grocery store where they sold produce and things like that, it was more like an hour drive. So this was the host family that we stayed with. This was a house. So it's kind of a pretty typical, this is actually considered a super nice house. Most of the houses in this town were basically lean-tos. So they would have just corrugated metal on top of a very basic wood structure. So the reason this house was so nice is our host mother's family had moved to America and sent them cash regularly. So they were considered one of the rich people in town. And they had a multiple bedroom house and TV. So very unusual. It was a very fancy house. This shows the river here. So this is their entire water supply. So they drink straight out of the river. You can see they also wash their cars in the river, the dishes in the river, their bodies in the river. So we did not drink the water. They were like, do not drink any of the water, you will die. They're fine, you will die. So we had to go get water from that general store up the hill and carry it down anytime we needed it. So we bought big jugs and we tried to share with all the people. And so yeah, we did bathe in this river as well. So you just sort of find a little spot and bathe away in the river. So it really was quite a different experience than anything these students or even I had ever had before. Just kind of showing some of the environment a little bit here. Dogs, nobody owns the dogs. They're just stray dogs wandering around. And you can see these are puppies. They're all pretty darn skinny. And they're just scavenging for food, like all the time. If you've got food, they're like, they stay about this distance away from people at all times, but they're waiting to see, are you gonna drop it? Are you gonna throw me something? Because people do definitely throw them food, so they'll be eating like chicken and they'll toss a bone to the dogs. And then 4 dogs will fight over it. And then one of them gets it, runs off, but nobody particularly owns these dogs. While I was there, somebody shot a dog, and then it turned out that that belonged to this other guy, and he was really mad. So there were some conflicts over ownership of these dogs too. Basically, there was maybe like 2 dogs in town that had collars on them, and if they had a collar, that meant they were owned. Otherwise, you could shoot them at will. So, you know, these people are barely eking out an existence themselves, so caring for dogs is not really high on their priorities. This does show some of those lean-tos, like this is a house here. You know, it's pretty primitive in the area. Not much there. This is a man we met near the bar. Almost everybody who works for the coffee farms in some way. So the coffee farms employ almost the entire area because there's just not much else. There's a couple people owning bars, but again, that's pretty much it. They do rely on the people coming in with this Blue Mountain project to buy things from them. That's actually where they get a fair amount of their money. So they would sell you coffee in just little Ziploc bags. You get like a gallon Ziploc bag, and they're like, I'll sell you this 1 pound bag of coffee for $15 or $10. And which is pretty good because Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee sells for really high amounts. So they would sell you coffee all the time. And I asked Joe Hatcher, who's been there a number of times, I was like, where did they get this coffee? And he's like, oh, it's stolen. 100% stolen from the coffee farms they work at. It's sort of an understanding that they don't pay them very well, and they're going to steal the coffee. So they sell it sort of black market to people who come. And apparently they tried to bring somebody in, the coffee farmers tried to bring somebody in to crack down on the stealing of the coffee. And they received enough death threats that they quickly quit their job. And now everybody just keeps going with making sure they steal their coffee. No one says anything about it. So it's an interesting environment. One of the things I most loved in Jamaica was the fruit. There is just fruit trees everywhere. We were visiting a farm, and so many of these pictures are from that farm. So, you know, you can just pick bananas fresh off the tree, and there's about 5 different kinds of bananas that they have. So there's green bananas, red bananas, and then a couple different types of yellow bananas that they also eat. Small ones, big ones. It's pretty amazing, all the different types. This one is jackfruit. If you've ever had jackfruit, it comes in these, they grow huge. And you crack it open and it's a yellow fruit, super sticky when you're cutting into it. But it has actually a fair amount of meaty texture to it, so they often use it as a replacement for meat. This is wild strawberries we found growing and picked them. They were delicious. We have pineapples, of course, growing up here, and sugar cane, of course, grows really well in Jamaica, so they just whacked off a piece of sugar cane and handed pieces to everybody, and you just sit and suck on it and pull the sugar out by sucking on it, which was fun. And then the last one I thought was really fun was cocoa. That's actually a cocoa plant, and of course inside is the bean, is inside this white fruit. I never really thought about what cocoa looks like before, And it's bizarre. It doesn't look anything like you might expect it to look like. So it was this yellow pod, and then it had this white fruit inside. It reminded me a little bit of like lychees, if you've ever had those, like kind of white, creamy, and a little sweet fruit. And it's the seeds inside of that they dry out and grind up into cocoa powder to make all the chocolates. We also had these grapefruits that were so sweet. Grapefruit I always think of so sour, but their grapefruits were just super sweet. They were yellow and white fleshed, quite delicious. And mangoes, there were mangoes everywhere. All right, so a little bit about the school that we worked at. So these are the 4th grade students that we worked with. This is their sports kit that they were wearing. This is their normal uniform that they wore the other days. The first day that we got there, first we had to hike up. It's a little hard to tell, but this is super steep. It's a 30-minute walk from where almost everybody lives to the school, straight uphill. It's up the mountain. So we are hiking up this mountain 30 minutes every day. With all the kids. Usually their kids are like trailing behind us and they come and talk to us. Hey, what's your name? What are you doing? So the kids were great. We get to the school the first day and they say, 4th grade teacher didn't show up. You guys are teaching 4th grade today. We're like, what are we supposed to teach? And they're like, it doesn't really matter. Oh, okay. Let's figure out some things to do. So a couple of education majors had some like lesson plans that they'd written out a little bit, and my mom's a storyteller, so I know some stories. So we sat and had some story time. We did a little math. We worked a little on reading and told some more stories. So we sort of just tried to keep them occupied as best we could. The environment is really different. The 4th and 5th grade got combined into one classroom. Kids didn't really have pencils or erasers, so they were often like sharing. There'd be like one eraser for the entire classroom because they just don't have resources for it. There was one kid who had nice shoes. Everybody else had like holes in the toes. Their soles are completely worn out. But they all had really nice uniforms, which was interesting. So all the uniforms looked in good shape, but just about everything else was pretty scarce. So we spent one full week with these kids and another half a week the next week, just working with them. So we do different classrooms and help out teachers any way that we could. Again, the teachers are not paid well. They just sometimes don't show up. They usually live far away. Some of them live up to an hour away from the school, and there's not a huge incentive to make it to the school. Corporal punishment is still very much alive there. So 2 kids got into a little bit of a fight on the playground, and they took them back to the back of the school, and you could hear the kids screaming as the smacks happened. So just a different environment, again, different customs. The one thing I would say that was amazing there, their lunches. Oh my gosh, my kids would die if they had these lunches. They would love it. It was like fresh rice and beans, and then huge pieces of grilled chicken, and they were just delicious. Then they had a curry the next day. They were big meals and really quite good. But for some of the kids, that's probably about the only time they'll eat that day. So good that they give them the good food that time. This is the center that the Blue Mountain Project built that does medical care and, again, some educational stuff. The kids are very affectionate, so the kids would just come right up and love on you all of the time. This little girl actually had a umbilical hernia that hadn't been fixed because there are no doctors. So basically, like, her stomach was protruding out of her belly button. So she had that. And again, there's just no one to go to. There's no doctors nearby. No one can afford the doctors. There's no trash removal. So they either burn their trash or it piles up. So there's all these dead cars all over as you're driving, because what do you do with them? You can't move them. It's through these mountains. There's no one to change tires or fix the cars. So again, very, very different environment. So one part that we did while we were there, in addition to the schoolwork, we also did some mural painting to try and sort of freshen up the town. So all the college students and a bunch of people from town helped to repaint this mural. You can see it's kind of fading, so we brightened that up. finished it. We had an after picture, I just don't know where it went, despite my looking. One of the other fun things that we did is we hiked the Blue Mountain. That's probably the most popular thing to do in this region. It is the highest mountain there. So it's about 7,200 foot high mountain, and it's about a 5.8 mile hike total. It takes about 4 hours to get to the top of the mountain. Most people do this hike overnight and arrive at the peak at sunrise. We were not in the bestest shape as a group, and felt like we didn't really want to be hiking a mountain in the dark. That didn't seem like a great idea. So we decided that we were just going to go in the morning. All the Jamaicans thought we were crazy. They're like, it's way too hot. You cannot possibly hike in that heat. It was like 80. It was fine. But it is humid, so we were all sweating for sure. But we hiked up the mountain. You can see us hiking up, and it did take us about 4 hours. It is a UNESCO National World Heritage Site, so it's just this beautiful forested area, and it's just gorgeous. When we got to the top, we decided to do a little yoga at the top of the mountain, which was really fun. We ended up going there about 8 a.m. and getting to the top at around noon, somewhere in there. All right, so just gorgeous areas as we were hiking. This area of Jamaica is incredibly beautiful. And again, it's not a side that most people see, because most people just see that beach side of Jamaica. And certainly I felt like everything we bought there was making a big difference in the community. So many of the students bought like little handmade purses from people, or bags, things like that, because a lot of them know that a lot of Americans come to this area, so they sell these homemade products. Overall, I felt like I really got a very different experience than any other travel I've had in my life, because normally you go to more developed areas, and very rarely do you have a chance to sort of see these third world conditions. So I really enjoyed it. The people were so nice for the most part. They're very blunt. So they would be like, "Hey, Whitey! Hey, Whitey! Why are you so fat?" You'd be like, "Oh, okay. This is just how I am," right? But they were not afraid to just say what they thought, and that's sort of their culture, is they just would say exactly what they were thinking about whatever it is you were doing. But they were also very respectful. They tend to be very respectful, in particular to white people. So our tire flattened one of the times we were driving we had to go back to Kingston for a little trip to a school, and our tire went flat, and I was like, oh, what are we gonna do? There's not like AAA out there. She's the person who's the director of the Blue Mountain Project was like, oh, don't worry about it. 3 white women, somebody will be here in like 30 minutes and they'll fix it completely for us. Sure enough, this guy comes up on a motorcycle about 10 minutes later, and he's like, oh, we can fix this. And he just starts fixing the tire for us. They are very friendly, they're willing to help out. They're also always trying to scam you a little bit, so you just have to know that, like, we are stealing this coffee and they're gonna sell it to you for as much as they think they can get from you. Similarly, one of our students became good friends with a bunch of the locals, and he brought $200 for buying different things as he needed, and that was gone in 5 days, because he was so nice. He was buying drinks for all of the locals, and marijuana is legal there, so he's buying marijuana for all of the locals. All the locals loved him. They thought he was just the best. So we had to have a chat with him about, maybe we shouldn't buy them so much. It's occasionally okay to buy a drink for somebody, maybe not for the entire group. So we loaned him some money to make it through, because you still have to buy water and things like that. So that is a little bit about my trip to Jamaica. Do you have any questions? Yeah.
Can you just expand a little bit more on the school system? If these kids are not getting like a prescribed curriculum, what do they do? And how long do they go to school for? And what happens after they get done with whatever schooling they have?
This school went to 6th grade. If they continue beyond 6th grade, they would have to take a bus for an hour and a half to go to the next school. So some do, most don't. education level. There is a prescribed curriculum to some extent, but there's not really people to administer it regularly, necessarily. So they're getting some, but whether they're actually meeting those standards, and the government is not so organized. They're not so worried about Hagley Gap in the middle of nowhere, right? It's so far out that people just don't do much. Like I said, there's no trash service or anything, right? There's no services really at all out there. There's no police, there's no emergency care, nothing. There's nothing out there.
Do
So
they speak English?
they do, yep. Although they do a dialect called patois, which is basically kind of a little French-ized. Like it just sounds funny. So like if they wanted to say what's going on, they go wagwan, wagwan, Irie. So they have some slang terms that are sort of English, but they also don't really sound like English when they speak that way. But yes, for the most part, they speak English. In school, they would sound much more proper English than they did when they're just talking outside.
So where did the uniforms
In
come
the
from?
school that you went to every day.
So the kids came there from all around that region. So we had to hike up the hill, but there's also a group of kids that were higher that hiked down to this school. So I would say maybe like 100 kids, maybe a little bit more. There's no playground equipment, so it was just like an open field and some blacktop, and they would play games. So I taught my kids one of those games. One of their favorite games to play was called Lemonade. So they'd go, lemonade, country ice. Sing it once, sing it twice. Turn around, touch the ground, freeze. And then you hold your position, and if somebody moves, they're out. And then once somebody moves, then they would do it again, and the person who was out would sit down, and you just keep playing in the circle. They did have soccer, football, and they were playing a huge game of soccer during that recess time. But otherwise, that's like all that they had to play with. Yeah.
So where did the uniforms come from, and who cooked the new meal?
So there was a cook there at the school that cooked the meals for the kids and for us as well. And then the uniforms, I think the parents have to pay for them. So they saved up to pay for them. Some of them were definitely like several time hand-me-downs, but I think the parents had to pay for them. And I think that's the British, right? So the British colonized Jamaica, and the British very much like their uniforms in their public schools. So all of Jamaica has uniforms. And the uniform colors are dependent on the school you're from. So like my host brother, go back to it, had a very different uniform. I think you're wearing it in that picture. Oh no, I guess it wasn't that picture. Yeah, he's not wearing his uniform there. But he had a very different uniform than the other kids, although most of the boys wear variations on brown. But the girls' dresses are quite different. So some of them may be bright blue with a yellow shirt, green, red even. So each school has a very different uniform for their kids. And only the wealthiest kids would go into high school. Because again, that hour-and-a-half trip, not only is it such a long time, but you have to pay for the bus. It's not a free bus. So this little boy, my host brother, he went at 6 o'clock in the morning. He had to leave to go to school by 8. So he would get up 5, 4 o'clock in the morning and get on the little bus, which was a van that picked up like 5 kids and took them to the school, the high school. That was because he was academically gifted, so they wanted to get him to keep going and try and finish high school, maybe go to college.
So what do the 6th graders, when they graduate, do they go to work? What do they do?
I think they don't work yet, but as they get a little older, then they might start going to work. They're certainly helping out with other kids in the house probably at 6th grade. But again, a lot of them, even at the adults, there were a lot of people who weren't working. So, opportunities are limited there, so they eke out what existence they can.
Are there any programs to help those people at all?
Mountain Project is a great organization that's in this community, and Ribbon still has a group that tries to go. They do some fundraising and supply collection, so they try to collect supplies for the school, in particular pencils and markers, notebooks, things like that, to send to them. So yeah, there's some, and I'm sure there are in other places as well, but yeah. Despite that, they're pretty happy, you know? They're pretty content. Oh, one of the other things I found really interesting culturally is women who are wealthy have no men around. So wealthy women lived by themselves, often with children, but they would not be with husbands. It was really only the poorer people who had husbands in the household, which I thought was really fascinating. And they would very openly say that too. They're like, I don't need a man, I got money. You know, so it's very, very much like, why would you want a man in your house if you didn't need to, right? Like, why would you? So it was very funny to kind of hear that in the people.
How would they earn their wealth, these women?
Mostly like family members who went to America and sent back money. That's almost all the wealth in the town. Yeah. There were a couple of people in town, like I said, there was a bar owner who was quite wealthy, and then there was a person who owned like a smaller coffee farm who was fairly wealthy, but there wasn't many. But again, money goes pretty far here. Things are super cheap in this. Beer's $1. So
How much was the water?
we would get like big jugs for like $3. Like a few gallons of water at a time for like $3.
Where did they bring the water in from?
I'm not sure where the bottled water came from, but otherwise like the other people just drank from the river. So because she was more wealthy, she actually had water piped in from the mountains. So there was like a little pipe system that came from the mountains. So she was drinking like upstream water from,
Which was cleaner, probably.
which is cleaner, yep, than what most of the people were drinking down here. Yeah, so most people didn't have running water, although they're moving more. So apparently the last time they went, there was more people who had running water in their houses compared to 5 years ago when I went. The water isn't warm, they don't have water heaters, so if you're taking a shower inside, it's still freezing cold water from the mountains that you were showering with. And the toilet would flush like every 4th time that you tried to flush it. And usually you had to take a bucket and throw the water in because there wasn't enough water in there to actually flush it. Yeah.
Where did the poor people go to the bathroom?
Did what, say that?
Where did the poor people go to the bathroom? Second river?
Yep. Little holes in the outhouses, things like that. Yeah.
So then do some of them actually take the time or go to this grocery store that's so far away every once in a while, or don't you know?
Some of them did, or like, it is really a tight-knit community, so I suspect that what often happened is like, oh, she's going to the grocery store, put your list in, right, and then she'd bring back things for different people and families.
So what kind of transportation did they have to do that then? Or?
Many of them had cars of some type that they would use. I think she had a car, but her brother did, so he would drive and bring things to them. And so they all got paid for hosting us, which is why they're really here to host us, and they would cook us dinners and stuff. So they would like order things in. So one day they asked us what we would like to have for dinner if we hadn't had something that we wanted to try. And she'd been talking about this goat curry she makes. We're like, we'd love to try goat curry. So she brought in goat meat and made us this goat curry. So yeah, so they managed to get food in and occasionally get the produce and stuff. The produce grows in the backyard. So she had this huge garden, and in that garden there were bananas. She'd pick us bananas fresh every morning, and there were grapefruit, and she had a little coffee plant of her own that she picked from, although she actually served us Nescafe, but that's okay. And then, like just general herbs and spices. Mostly they just grow things themselves quite a bit. Yeah.
much of any kind of bread?
Not a ton. They did a little bit of like flatbreads, but that was about it. A lot of rice. So they had like these just sacks of rice. And that they sold up at the little general store that was close by. So you get like the sacks of rice. And, you know, frankly, they probably were eating the goats. And there were chickens wandering around. So I'm sure they were eating some of the food that they were raising together in this town. So, yeah.
Did you have problems with any other animals? I know you talked about the dogs and there were goats and chickens, but were there any other, like when you were hiking up the mountain, did you run into any?
There was a beautiful bird, this tail. This is actually the Jamaican national bird. It's got these like long scissor tail. It's kind of like a scissor tail flycatcher, but it's even longer and more gorgeous. I didn't get a good picture of it, so I didn't put it in. But that's not the only thing. There's not a lot of like big animals on the island. Yeah, because it's decently far from a mainland, and so nothing's really gotten there. There were, I think we saw a deer at one point, but that was about it. Yeah, there were cats around all over the place too. Not as many as dogs, but there were some cats, and there was a lot of birds, tons of birds around, and they get really irritated with birds and shooting birds too.
If you don't have guns?
Not a ton of guns,